Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We still have a couple more people joining, so for those that are joining now, I apologise that we're already starting, but want to start promptly today. So thank you very much for joining this afternoon or this morning's seminar for GetFTR. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. We are recording this session, so please, if you'd rather have your video camera turned off, then do so now. We will have an interactive Q&A session towards the end, so please do feel to drop any questions, comments, thoughts, etc. into the chat box, and Lisa and I will pick those up as we are going through. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speakers today. We have Lisa with us, who is obviously Professor and Librarian from the University of Illinois and also part of the GetFTR Librarian Advisory Board. And then we also have Ralph and Laird from ACS and Springer Nature with us respectively, who also make up part of the GetFTR Steering Committee. So without further ado, Lisa, I will hand over to you. Thank you, everyone.
So good morning if you're in the US, and good afternoon if you're in Europe or elsewhere. So as Katie said, and thank you, Katie, I'm Lisa Hinchliffe. I'm a librarian at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I think it's important that we ground our discussion in about GetFTR in the whole reason we're doing this work at all. And that is to, in the words of sort of a famous scholar in library and information science, Raghunathan, to save the time of the user. We know that users experiences many challenges in getting to full text. And so GetFTR has the aim of smoothing the pathway to full text, whether that is subscribed content or open access content, but improving that user pathway, saving their time. The specific tactic that GetFTR takes is to improve the link to the full text. So that link is, if you will, smart about the kinds of full text that user might be entitled to from their result sets. And the strategy is really here to take a shared approach across the publishing ecosystem to create a consistent user experience, and also therefore save the time of the user who doesn't have to learn multiple pathways and multiple systems for getting to content. We take the next slide, we'll see that this is no small challenge. And honestly, this slide is almost potentially even understates the issue. We have different data sources here, so we all know the challenge of doing that. But just as a simple example, we've got 10,000 publishers, 3 million articles a year. Who knows how many researchers, but we estimate, at least in the formal role, 7.8 million. And the hours per searching, at least according to Elsevier's data on their site, is 31 million. So there's a lot of time that people are putting in, lots of content, lots of people, and we want to all of them have a better experience. And what we know from current situation is that finding a citation, finding a reference to an article that might be on your topic does not always mean that you get access to it. But most disappointingly is when, of course, it doesn't mean you get access to it, but you should have. And GetFTR is an attempt to help smooth that pathway. So I'm going to turn it over to Ralph to explain from a publisher perspective a little bit more about how this can be conceptualized.
Thanks, Lisa. So it's important for us to understand here that GetFTR sits right in the middle here between citation, reference managers, scientific collaboration networks on the left-hand side here. Really, any place where a researcher might be doing a literature search to discover relevant content. That's really the target for GetFTR, and that's what's depicted here on the left-hand side. And then, of course, on the right-hand side are those sources of the content itself, the publishers that actually produce the content. And so GetFTR really builds a bridge between those two constituencies. We've listed here some of the active live participants on both sides. On the left-hand side, I note that we didn't list a few that are live as well, like Chorus and Cactus has come on board recently as well. And we've got, in round numbers, we probably have about 15 or so additional integrators on the left-hand side and about the same number of publishers on the right-hand side that are currently working with us in various states of enabling the capability to either call GetFTR from the integrator side or support the response from GetFTR on the publisher side. So if you go to the next slide, if we drill into this just a little bit more, what does GetFTR actually do? Well, it returns what we like to call these smart links back to the discovery service that is calling GetFTR. So a discovery service really passes two items to the GetFTR service. It sends a DOI of the article in question, and then a identifier for the user's institution. And that could either be what's called a SAML entity ID for federated authentication that just uniquely identifies the user's institution, or it could be the user's IP address, or we also are moving to support other institutional identifiers like GRID, ROR, Ringgold. There's a whole host of institutional identifiers. But it essentially asks that question to say, does someone from this institution have access to this DOI? And if institutional access is determined, it returns these smart links back to the integrator. And we call these smart links because they effectively work regardless of the user's location. They work if the user is on a recognized network or on a proxy server. When the user comes to the publisher site following that link, they're going to be authorized via IP address authorization as they are today. But if they are not on a recognized network, IP network, then what happens when they land on the publisher site is they get redirected through their campus through federated authentication. And yeah, if you go to the next slide, I'll walk through the steps here a little bit more granularly. So first, let's follow the upper white arrows here. So if the user is on campus, already logged into their campus infrastructure, maybe they logged into something like Blackboard earlier in the day or something like that, and they do a search on one of these discovery services. They click on a GetFTR link that is surfaced through the discovery service, and they land directly on the content in question. The publisher is free to determine whether the publisher wants that full text content to be either a PDF or an HTML or an EPUB or whatever. The publisher, that's publisher decision. But we do say that the publisher has to serve the content directly to the user and not put up any like interstitial pages, in response to a GetFTR link. So that was the white arrows if you're on campus. If you are off campus or have not already previously logged into your campus infrastructure, same kind of pattern. You do the search, you click on the GetFTR link, but here when you land on the publisher site, you don't have any means of authenticating your institutional affiliation. And so you're going to be routed through your institutional login page. Again, the page that, if you are affiliated with an institution, it's that login screen that you probably see every single day. And that's what you would have to do. And you would only have to do that once, because once you establish a session on your campus authentication server, then you are kind of following the white path. For every subsequent click to of the GetFTR link, you're going to have that more seamless, streamlined access to the content. So if we go forward. So this shows a little display of how GetFTR links are being surfaced in a couple of our integrators right now. This is a screen from Mendeley. I'm sorry, this is from Dimensions. And you'll see that their view PDF link on this page has been changed to be this GetFTR link that has the user's institutional context built into it. You'll see that in this case, it says, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign does actually have access to this article. And if you click on that link, yeah, you may be asked to log in through your campus infrastructure, but it gives the user the feedback that they do have access to this article. So, and if you go one more screen, I think here we see on Mendeley, the same idea. This is more depicting an off-campus experience. So if I click on that view PDF link, if I'm not on a recognized network, I would be routed immediately to my institutional login page where it says, hey, you've got to log in to get access to this article from ACS Publications. And then once you do that, we would give you the PDF directly as a result of that login. So that's a bit about the user experience. And I'll turn it over to Laird.
Yes, thanks very much, Ralph. Actually, I'd like to skip this slide, Lisa. Do you mind going on to the next one? Okay, that's great. Thanks. I'll just try to explain this because I think this is this will hopefully be interesting. So, I'll try and explain what's here on this slide. So when a researcher comes to one of those what we call integrators, so a discovery service or scholarly collaboration network, so that might be Digital Sciences Dimensions, or it might be a Mendeley, for example, and say searches for a list of articles or goes to an article page, what that integrator does is they send off a request to GetFTR saying, hi, I've got this user from this institution and I want to know whether they're entitled to these DOIs on the publisher's platforms. And then GetFTR goes and makes a call to Crossref to say, hi, you know, which publisher owns this DOI? And based on that, they then go to the publisher's API to say, hi, you know, I've got somebody looking for this DOI from this institution. Are they entitled? And that allows GetFTR to provide that information back to the integrator to provide the experience for the user on their websites. And one thing that's visible to GetFTR is some of those integrators are sending through responses for or requests for DOIs for publishers who aren't participating in GetFTR at the moment. So, you know, we can see, for example, you know, a request will come through to GetFTR for, you know, a DOI for this publisher who isn't participating at the moment. And GetFTR is recording those, and based on the accumulation of what we record, we can see that there is an opportunity there. So there are publishers who aren't participating, who if they were participating, GetFTR could give those links back to those researchers on those discovery services or scholarly collaboration networks and ease their discovery, authentication, and access journey. Right here, you'll see that that number is 21.7% of all of the requests that are coming through GetFTR at the moment. That's skewed a little bit because at least one of the integrators isn't sending through requests for all publishers, but just the subset of publishers who are participating at the moment. But it does still give us some sense of the size of the sort of opportunity here for those publishers who aren't participating. Thanks. And there's a lot of words on this slide, but let me just try to maybe tell the story, and that will help to make it clear. So we launched GetFTR in January of 2020, so over a year ago now, with a couple of integrators to begin with. And really our intention over the course of the last year was to learn things about the service, right? So to get it out there, get people using it, and learn what worked well and what didn't work well. And really, I'll just explain some of the things that we've learned and some of the changes that we've made to the service to try and make it work better for researchers and for those integrators and for publishers and for librarians. So, one of the big things that we learned was that we need to more closely involve the librarian community in the shaping of this service. So we've spoken more with the librarian community about the service and their questions and concerns, and one of the key things that have come out of that is, well, what happens if we license the content from an aggregator, you know, ABSCO or ProQuest or Ovid? How do they fit into this experience for the user? And based on that feedback, we're talking with those aggregators, and we're figuring out how that aggregator use case fits into GetFTR, and that's something that we're actively working on at the moment. Another thing that we discovered was, to begin with, GetFTR only supported federated authentication, so what you might know as Shibboleth and Open Athens. But obviously there's a ceiling on how many institutions have support federated access or have it enabled with publishers. Not every institution has federated access enabled with every publisher. And so if you're only relying on federated authentication, it really narrows the range of researchers who you can get FTR responses for. And you know, obviously IP, even in these current circumstances, is still the dominant means of authentication to publishers' websites. And so we also introduced an IP authentication check. And that massively increased the number of researchers who we were able to return a GetFTR link for, and again, ease their discovery, authentication, and access journey. And that you know, that learning and that sort of evolution of the service continues on. And I think one of the further key ways in which it continues is new use cases for GetFTR that are coming up. So a nice example that has come up is Chorus, who wanted to find a more efficient way to audit whether publishers were actually making content open access on their websites and in accordance with mandates. They used to just have to go and sort of manually check on publishers' sites. But by using GetFTR, they're able to you know, make a call for all of the DOIs that they think should be open access and go and check on publishers' sites that they are, and quickly, much more quickly run that audit. Those other use cases for this cross-publisher entitlement service are out there, and we're continuing to develop the service to support those use cases. With that, if it's okay, I think I will hand over to Katie and Lisa to take us through any kind of questions that people have.
Great.
You know, maybe I can add too before we get into the Q&A that, you know, I think we still feel it's early days for GetFTR. You know, while we have around somewhere just around 50% maybe of the content surfaced through GetFTR now with the publishers involved, you know, we clearly realize that there is a very long list of potential integrators and additional publishers, you know, that to come on board. And, you know, we really realize the value of this to the entire ecosystem with as broad a participation as possible. So even though, you know, some of the stats that we showed there, what was something over 20 million or so, you know, requests through GetFTR, you know, in the last week, I think it was, it's still very, very, very early days. I mean, that's really, you know, still a pretty small subset of the whole promise here, you know, that the challenge that Lisa laid out there. So just want to recognize too that, you know, we do view this as very early days at this point.
So excellent. I see some questions starting. And so I hope other people will continue to put questions in the chat. As Ralph and Laird know, I can always ask questions though. No, I really appreciate, I want to underscore how important it's been that the group has really reached out to the library community and helped, I think, understand better the kind of user problems that we see in our pathways, particularly in these pandemic times where we're so remote. So great. I see a question from Sean Concanon. Could we get a little more insight? I mean, I think everyone can kind of get how the IP authentication entitlement check works, right? Like, because I think what's happening here is there's really two processes, if I could. There's the, can I tell which institution you're from? And then are you already authenticated or, you know, through your campus system? And so those things look like they're actually the same, but they're actually different. And so I don't know, is this a Ralph question or a Laird question? Who wants to take it?
I can start. So yeah, I think it is important to note that GetFTR really has like two different services, like Lisa just said. One is an entitlement check, right? You know, we are, through GetFTR, you can ask that question: does someone from this institution have access to this DOI? That's the entitlements check. And what Laird just described is we did this year allow an IP address to be part of that entitlements verification check. You know, you can pass an IP address through GetFTR, and that is a means of an institutional identifier. And then the publisher system actually, you know, determines whether or not that either that IP address or the SAML entity ID for federated authentication, whether that institution has access to the DOI. So I think it's also really important to note here that with GetFTR, GetFTR is asking the publisher platform, the publisher system directly, does someone from this institution have access to this DOI? It's not like subscriber links where, you know, we kind of make a cache of that information on a regular basis and send it off to someone, or it's not like a library portal that maybe has a manually curated list of entitlements, you know, that a librarian might be maintaining. This is reaching into that publisher, if you will, that publisher source of truth, to determine whether or not someone is entitled. And then the other service is more that linking service, right? Which is, you know, follow the link, go to the publisher platform, and then that smart link is set up to more easily navigate the user through the publisher platform environment. Being, you know, if I'm on a recognized IP address, I get access instantly. If not, I get rerouted through federated authentication to prove my institutional affiliation. So those are the two things.
Laird, you look like maybe you wanted to add something to that.
Well, I don't know if it's maybe going into too much technical detail, but since we have publishers on the line at the moment, it's worth noting so that the thing that is enabling that federated authentication is a form of what you call a wafeless URL. So for those who sort of understand that technology and all that wafeless URL is doing for that. If we're not doing IP, if we're going the federated authentication route, that wafeless URL that we're returning, all it's doing is when somebody clicks on that on the integrator's website, so that discovery service or Scholarly Collaboration Network's website, is it's then initiating that essentially that login for the user on their institutional identity provider, so that then they can come through to the publisher's website easily and just gain access to the content. But it's a lot shorter and quicker route for those users as opposed to, you know, coming through to the publisher's site, hitting a paywall, finding where the right link is for Shibboleth and Athens, searching for your institution, bouncing out, then coming back. It really shortens the path for people.
Yeah. Laird, I know when I'm on these kind of webinars and I hear a new term, I'm trying to desperately probably Google it. Wafeless is not a waif like an orphan. Could you spell wafeless for us just so we can learn to, or maybe you could put it in the chat?
Yes, I can absolutely do that. Yes, it's
Okay,
just to spell it out quickly for people, it's WAYFLESS. I'll put it in the chat. WAYF is an acronym for where are you from? So that is the step where people often select what their institution is, but this allows them to kind of skip that step to get through the federated authentication journey more quickly. I'll throw it in the chat.
I myself was on some webinar one time trying to figure out how you spelled wavelengths. Katie, could you go back to the Mendeley slide? Because if I could, I'd like to just sort of, I think the Mendeley slide in particular helps us see this, which is you can see on here that Mendeley, let's pretend I'm the researcher. Mendeley says, oh, your institution is the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So Mendeley knows my affiliation, but it doesn't have the ability to assert that authentication. It can just use that affiliation to ask the publisher site, so does somebody at the University of Illinois, American Chemical Society, get to use this article? American Chemical Society is sending back and saying, yes, so please structure that link in this way. And GetFTR is structuring that link so that rather than clicking on it and going to a generic page, I get routed through this access pathway where if I follow the pathway, I will end up with the full text. So I think the Mendeley example makes it even easier to see, because we know that Mendeley is not, isn't one of, it's from a publisher, but it's not a publisher. So it looks like we've got another question here, specifically about this, the alternative document, right? So we know that they'll get this nice PDF if they are entitled. What happens if I'm not entitled? Yeah,
that's something that we haven't made a lot of noise about, because actually none of the publishers are supporting this yet, but we're about to. This is something that's coming up real soon. So we've said from the start that for users that are not entitled through their institutional affiliation to get access to the version of record, what could GetFTR offer? What could a publisher offer those unentitled users through GetFTR as an alternative, which we call the alternative version? And here we've really said that we imagine that publishers are going to experiment with many different ideas here. And we started to share some of those ideas with one another, and some of those should be coming to light fairly soon. So, you could imagine perhaps that a publisher might give an alternative version that is something broader than just the abstract, but maybe not the entire version of record. You could imagine that you might point to a preprint version of the article. You could imagine that you might serve up a limited capability, like a read-only version of the article. I mean, these are all different ideas that I think publishers are likely going to start to experiment with. There is by no means is GetFTR here, trying to set a standard or anything for how that would work. I think we're just really enabling a playing field, if you will, where publishers can experiment with different kinds of alternative versions.
And if I can say this, because Laird might be seen as biased if he were to say it, Springer Nature does have a version of this with their ResearchGate syndication of, if you are entitled, you get the full PDF. If you're not entitled, you get an extracted version. And there was a nice white paper that Springer Nature put out looking at the research around their syndication pilot that included the final decision about what they're serving up on ResearchGate as the alternative. So I will quickly go find my Scholarly Kitchen article about that, which includes the link to the report, and put that in the chat. But I think that's a particularly key thing that we've talked about from the library perspective as well, which is to also make sure that we have to be so confident that the user truly shouldn't is truly not entitled, and it's not a pathway problem. So I really am happy that we've put the attention first on the pathway issues. Because of course, the last thing a librarian wants is for you to tell one of our users they're not entitled when we have paper, and you don't want that either, right? So great. Susan asks, could you provide publishers, what kind of stats, like what's the service back to the publisher about this?
Yeah, one of the things that we clearly have said is that this has to be a level playing field. Any stats that GetFTR were to provide to publishers would need to be provided, in a consistent way to all, either like in an aggregated way. And so we are a bit cautious about what individual stats, the GetFTR service itself is going to be providing, both directions, either to publishers or to integrators. And the other thing about, well, as a prospective publisher, I can definitely understand that, wow, I'd really like to know how much traffic for my content is GetFTR seeing today, that I could avail myself of. I think it's important also to note what Laird said before. In some cases, integrators are deliberately screening out, calls to your content because the integrator knows that you're not participating in GetFTR. So that, that opportunity is not going to be there. And I just do think that we have to be careful to not give too much information, from that central GetFTR service to the publishers in terms of the traffic that we're seeing, because we did not create GetFTR to be a source of business intelligence, for anyone. We created GetFTR to be a pathway, streamline the pathways to content, and so that's that's really the reason that it exists.
Great. I do want to just make sure that we're clear. It's not that the integrator isn't showing any URL to the other content if they're not providing a GetFTR link to that content. Maybe that was clear, but I thought it was important that we're not taking any pathways away. A question about in the case where there's multiple, if you will, targets that the link could go to, who chooses where that target goes? If it's, and in particular, I think we know this is a question of It could be that the library has it from multiple aggregators, or it could be that they have it from the publisher and the aggregator. And I know I participated in a 3-hour Zoom webinar on this very topic, but I'm not sure I'm up to date on where the work on that question is.
Do you want to take it, Lloyd?
Yep, sure. Yeah, so we've been thinking about that aggregator use case specifically, and that scenario might come up, right, where the user is or the librarian subscribes to or the user can access the content either on the publisher site or on the aggregator site. And so how do you handle those cases? So at least in our first cut of solving that, what we would imagine is that the GetFTR. So when that call came through from the integrator for that piece of content, and if there was a participating aggregator, then GetFTR would make the call to both the aggregator and the publisher to say, "Hi, I have this user. Are they entitled to the piece of content on your website?" and get a response back. We've talked in this first cut of this about sort of prioritizing the publisher's link. If the user is entitled if the case happens that the user is entitled in both cases, although we have talked about a further development and extension of that, where it would be, the institution could choose what was surfaced, or we've also talked about the integrator themselves being able to surface multiple links there. I don't know, Ralph, have we actually I don't know that we've actually decided exactly what we're going to do yet, but we're still sorting out the aggregator use case and figuring out exactly how that's going to work.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say this is very active and very much a work in progress. But I think the basic idea is that aggregators would need to basically register the DOIs that they host that may be co-owned, with another publisher. To solve this dual authority problem, we would GetFTR needs to know, okay, this particular DOI might be hosted on Wiley's platform, or it might be hosted on an aggregator platform. And depending on, on the institution, you might get access through the aggregator, or you might get access from the publisher. So we do have to build that logic, if you will, into GetFTR, and that's what we're working with the aggregators right now on building that logic into GetFTR.
Yeah, I think obviously you'd prioritize entitled for the user, but if there was a case where a user is entitled in multiple places, then you kind of have to sort out some kind of priority in the first cut. And then we've talked about sort of figuring out some way that the institution might be able to choose priority as well.
So what I can say as well, in response to the question, when the workshop that I was in, the librarians are very interested in being the decider here, which is, consistent with the NISO ODI. And so I think the message is loud and clear. I think figuring out the technology and the programming and the data flows that make it possible is the next step.
Yep.
So I think this next question is one that, wow, to a lot of us, could we imagine what it would be like? Any prospect for Google Scholar or Clarivate Web of Science?
I would say the interesting thing about Google Scholar is this is a problem that ANURAG and Google Scholar have already solved, right? So Google Scholar already has their subscriber links program, in which publishers provide that entitlements information in a different, not in the same way that GetFTR is doing so, but in as sort of a file to Google Scholar standard, which we put up on a file server somewhere, and then Google Scholar comes and gets it, and then they have that, they let the user know whether they're entitled already. So in terms of the value of to researchers of essentially switching entitlement mechanisms, there's probably some limited value. That some of the value is in the fact that those sort of flat entitlements files that we send on to Google Scholar aren't really a true reflection of what the user is entitled to on our platforms. So it doesn't always capture, all of the content that is free, for example, or all of the content that has been published hybrid OA or something along those lines. And so I think GetFTR does have an advantage over the current setup with Google Scholar, in that it can provide that more accurate entitlements I think probably the sticking point in making the switch is that GetFTR is an external service that Google Scholar would have to call, and in terms of sort of the performance of doing that versus having the content, all of the entitlements data on Google Scholar's side, means that there is then a performance impact on the Google Scholar side, which is not something that they are massively keen on. So my view on Google Scholar is there's some small limited value to researchers in that area. The technology in terms of performance that is already in place with Google Scholar from their perspective, from a performance perspective, is superior.
But I think it's also fair to say we are in active conversation.
Yes, sorry if that wasn't clear. Yes,
as well.
Yes.
And as far as other potential integrators like in the question, yeah, I mean, stay tuned. Yeah, I think you'll see announcements from us, that other integrators like you would anticipate are going to be bringing GetFTR services live.
But I think the other thing we could say is if people had, publishers are collaborating with these platforms where they would like to see that platform be an integrator, feel free to mention it to them, right? Because I will say, of course, Google Scholar does have those subscriber links. They don't light up nearly as well as they used to now that we're in pandemic times, because they were dependent on sort of catching the device as being affiliated with the institution, as opposed to having any pathway into our authentication systems. And I know recently, actually, it was an ACS article even, Ralph, a researcher was like, I don't know why we don't have access to this. And I'm like, oh, we definitely have access to that. And, the Google Scholar path failed her, didn't send her through our authentication system, and she hasn't been on campus. So
that's a good point in the current circumstances.
Yeah. Nonetheless, I'll say this to Google Scholar as often as I can. They don't really, we all need to say it, I guess is what I want to say. I think not surprisingly on this group, there's a question about okay, let's get nitty gritty here. What are the technical requirements for a publisher to participate?
Yeah, we haven't said a lot about that. So first of all, it really depends on if you are using one of the platform providers, or if you have your delivery platform, that you support yourself. So the good news here is that if you are on one of the platform providers like Adapon, Silverchair, Highwire, those platform providers either already have or are soon going to support GetFTR. So Adapon already has built-in support for GetFTR. So if you are on the Adapon platform, talk to Adapon, and that API just already exists. Silverchair is coming very soon. We have one of the Silverchair publishers is committed to working with GetFTR, and so that will be coming very soon. And we also have indication from Highwire that they will be supporting GetFTR as well. So that's good news if you're on one of those platforms. If you are self-hosted, yeah, there is an API that you need to develop, and we have a specification that is written that we can share with you, and there are certain performance guidelines that we'd ask you to adhere to and things like that. So if you are self-hosted, there is some development work to be done.
And the link is on the slide for convenience. I just put it into the text chat because all of those things that Ralph just mentioned, terms of use, API, performance guidelines, et cetera, are all right there. So I'm just going to pause for a second and see, because I know in these kind of text chats, people can be following the conversation and have a question, but not typed it in yet. So let's pause for a second and see if there are any other sorts of questions that come in. This is something that I haven't warned Ralph or Laird that I was going to ask. So they get the permission to demur if they're like, but I'm wondering if your support teams, your help desk teams or anything have noted, any impact of having these links turned on, or is it too early to say, or do you just not know at all?
In terms of our internal sort of at Springer Nature, do you mean our support teams?
Yeah.
It hasn't. So I looking over those reports, I haven't seen anything specific that people have been asking about with regard to sort of their experience on participating integrator sites, or and any kind of issues that might have come up for them. So no, nothing has been raised. I don't know if that's an indication that everything is working brilliantly, or just an indication of sort of awareness and willingness to raise any kind of points. But yeah, in terms of sort of end user feedback in that way coming through to publishers, I haven't seen anything on the Springer Nature side.
Yeah, and same here.
Might be this usually I would say no news is not indicative of something, but I think what it does tell us is that implementing this doesn't seem to break anything, right? Which is always a concern.
Yeah, that's right. And I think also, I think it'd be very difficult to discern any, I think it would, if it came through our help desk, it would be an access type question. And, it would be very difficult to discern that it's a GetFTR, access type question, right? These kinds of shared community infrastructure are just supposed to work. And so it's not like, we're not out there promoting GetFTR to the researcher themselves. They're simply just clicking on links, to get access, and they expect it to work. And if it doesn't work, then they have an access problem, and they might contact us with an access problem. So, I think it would be tough to differentiate a GetFTR, specific request.
Yeah, I think it would have to. I mean, it would. If GetFTR stopped working, I think is when you would, and it's stopped. This is where I was saying, like, usually I say no evidence doesn't really lead you to conclude anything, but in this case, no evidence might lead us to conclude at least that it doesn't break anything obvious.
Well, right? Yeah, Lisa, you just said something interesting there as well. If GetFTR, the service itself, were to go down, the worst case is every integrator reverts back to the status quo from the last 20 years. They just link to us over DOIs, and the GetFTR links, don't appear. So it's not like it's really a terrible degradation, if that were to occur.
Yeah, that's good
to note, right? Because these links are built dynamically, if you will. And so if the GetFTR service failed, that just comes out of the system, and the regular link goes in. So really critical point, actually, that I'm not sure we've mentioned in any webinar. Yeah. So we need to add that to our talking points, right?
Good point.
Yeah. So I don't see any more questions coming in the chat or in messages to me. So why don't I see Laird, Ralph, last comments?
The one thing that I would just loop back around to is Susan's question about data. I think Ralph is right that sort of percentage that we showed isn't an accurate representation of the potential fully, because not every integrator, again, is sending us every request, and so even an aggregated view of that data for a single publisher wouldn't really be might be sort of a misleading representation. But if you wanted to get in touch with GetFTR and start those conversations about being a potential integrator, and start those conversations about size of the sort of opportunity and potential impact and those sorts of things, I think Diane Benham, who's and Heather Flanagan, who work on GetFTR, I would be very happy to get into those conversations with you, and those are I think those are the sorts of conversations they're having with other publishers as they're coming aboard, and as other publishers come aboard, they're also obviously tracking the impact of GetFTR for users and for their platforms.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just reiterate kind of what I said before about this still being early days for GetFTR, and really inviting widespread participation. Please do talk to us if you have any interest in joining, and I really encourage you to join. The value of a community infrastructure like this is through as broad a participation as possible. So just encourage you to reach out.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I said Heather Flanagan instead of Staines.
I was going to say,
I'm so sorry, Heather. I'm getting my Heathers mixed up between
Too many
different
Heathers.
activities. So I'm sorry, it's Heather Staines who's just shared her thanks Heather, who's just shared her email in the chat if you're interested. Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. These things happen, and but Heather's here and she's on it. So Diane, if you want to put your email in too, that would be great. Otherwise, of course, people can always go to the Get Full Text Research website, contact form, all the leadership committee, which I'm actually going to put that URL in because it may also be that you just want to reach out to somebody informally that you happen to know through other ways and just chat before you're ready to make that sort of like official call to say, hey, what it would take. So with that, I think what I will do is, if I'm not mistaken, I turn this back to Katie to wrap us up.
You've done it all for me, Lisa. So thank you very much. But just to say thank you very much to everyone for joining and for all your really useful questions. We will send a follow-up email around to you all, which will include all of our contact details, Diane and Heather's emails as well. So as Lisa, Ralph and Laird have all said, if you do have any questions, please do get in touch, either formally or informally. But yes, many thanks to you all, and thanks to Lisa, Ralph and Laird as well. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.